The rain-slicked streets of Chicago gleamed under the streetlights. But I barely noticed as I stumbled out of the bar, my heart pounding like a drum in a cage. I was 23, openly gay, and had just been dumped by my boyfriend of 2 years in front of half the patrons at Rosie's Tavern. Humiliation burned hotter than the whiskey in my throat. But then I saw him, Elliot, my rideshare driver, leaning against his black sedan, his broad shoulders tense, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stopped me cold. He didn't say a word as he opened the passenger door, his calloused hand brushing my arm as he guided me, almost shoved me into the seat. The door slammed shut, and I caught my reflection in the window, messy dark hair, red-rimmed eyes, and a look of someone who'd just lost everything. But when Elliot slid into the driver's seat, his jaw tight and his knuckles white on the wheel, I felt something shift, like the air itself was holding its breath. My name's Caleb Winters, a graphic designer scraping by in a city that chews up dreamers and spits them out. That night, I wasn't looking for anything but a ride home to my cramped Lakeview apartment. I'd booked the cheapest rideshare I could find, expecting some bored college kid or a chatty retiree. Instead, I got Elliot Kane, a 25-year-old ex-Marine with a crew cut, a faded tattoo peeking from his sleeve, and a vibe that screamed, "Don't ask, don't tell." He was straight as an arrow, or so I thought, with a gruff voice and a no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel like I was reporting for duty instead of catching a ride. "Where to?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl, as he glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His hazel eyes caught the glow of a passing streetlight, and for a split second, I swore I saw something softer there, something that didn't match the hard lines of his face. "Lakeview," I muttered, sinking into the seat, trying to disappear into the leather. "Just get me out of here." He didn't reply, just pulled onto the street, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Chicago blurred past neon signs, late-night dog walkers, the distant wail of a siren. I wanted to crawl into a hole and forget the night. Forget Jared's cruel laugh as he'd called me pathetic in front of everyone. But Elliot's presence was impossible to ignore. He drove with a precision that felt almost military, yet his hands fidgeted on the wheel, like he was wrestling with something unspoken. "You okay back there?" he asked after a few blocks, his voice cutting through my haze. It wasn't the usual driver small talk. It felt real. I forced a laugh, bitter and hollow. "Do I look okay?" He didn't answer right away, just kept driving. But I caught him glancing at me again in the mirror. "You look like you need a drink," he said finally, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Or a fight?" I snorted, surprised by the humor in his tone. Already had both tonight. Didn't go well. He nodded, like he understood more than he let on. "Been there." The car slowed at a red light, and the silence stretched again, heavy with something I couldn't name. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and studied him. His profile was sharp, all angles and stubble, but there was a tension in his shoulders, like he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. I don't know why I said it, maybe the whiskey, maybe the heartbreak, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "You ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what?" Elliot's hands tightened on the wheel, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, quietly, "Every damn day." The light turned green, and he drove on. But those 3 words hung in the air, binding us in a way I didn't expect. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't just about getting home. It was the start of something bigger, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, identity, and the courage it takes to be yourself. We pulled up to my apartment building. A crumbling brick walk-up with a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle, not ready to face the empty studio waiting upstairs. Elliot turned in his seat, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time. No mirror, no barriers, just us. "You gonna be all right?" he asked. And there it was again, that softness in his voice, like a crack in his armor. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I don't know." He didn't push, didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a crumpled business card with his name and number scrawled on it, and handed it to me. "If you need a ride or whatever, call me." I took the card, my fingers brushing his, and a jolt ran through me, sharp and unexpected. "Thanks," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. As I climbed out of the car, the rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet asphalt. Elliot watched me until I reached the door, his engine idling like he was waiting for something. I didn't look back, but I felt his gaze, steady and unwavering, long after I disappeared inside. That night, I lay awake, the card burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't know who Elliot Kane really was, or why he'd given me his number. But I knew one thing, the ride was far from over. The next morning, I woke to a pounding headache and the faint memory of Elliot's voice echoing in my skull. My apartment was a mess, empty takeout containers, a half-finished logo design on my laptop, and Jared's old hoodie still draped over the couch like a ghost. I clutched Elliot's card, its edges worn from my restless fingers, and wondered if I'd imagined the spark in his eyes. Chicago was gray and restless outside my window, mirroring the storm in my chest. I didn't want to face the world, but I had a freelance gig downtown to pitch for a local coffee shop's rebrand and I couldn't afford to blow it. I opened the rideshare app, my thumb hovering over the request button. But instead, I dialed the number on Elliot's card. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah." His voice was rough, like he'd just rolled out of bed. "It's Caleb. From last night." I paused, feeling foolish. "I need a ride." A beat of silence. Then, "Where you at?" 20 minutes later, his black sedan pulled up, looking out of place among the morning commuters and delivery trucks. I slid into the passenger seat front this time, not sure why, and caught the faint scent of leather and coffee. Elliot looked different in daylight, less guarded, but still unreadable. His jaw set as he merged into traffic. "You clean up nice," he said, glancing at my button-up and jeans. His tone was teasing, but his eyes lingered a second too long. I smirked, trying to play it cool despite the heat creeping up my neck, trying to impress some coffee snobs. "You always this chatty in the morning." He chuckled, a low rumble that made my stomach flip. "Only when I haven't had my coffee." We fell into an easy rhythm, trading quips about Chicago traffic and overpriced lattes. It felt normal, like we'd done this 100 times. But every time his hand brushed the gear shift, inches from my knee, I felt that same jolt from last night. I told myself it was nothing was straight, probably just being friendly, but my heart wasn't listening. The coffee shop pitch went better than expected, and by noon, I was back in Elliot's car, high on adrenaline and a signed contract. "You're my good luck charm," I said, grinning as I buckled in. He raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching. "Careful. Don't start thinking I'm your personal chauffeur." But he drove me around all day errands. A quick lunch at a taco truck, even a stop at an art supply store. Each ride felt less like a transaction and more like an excuse to keep talking. He told me about growing up in a small Illinois town, joining the Marines at 18, and leaving after a tour in Afghanistan with scars he didn't talk about. I shared bits of my life coming out at 16, moving to Chicago for art school, the sting of Jared's betrayal. It was easy, too easy, to open up to him. By evening, we ended up at a dive bar on the north side, not far from my place. It wasn't planned. I'd mentioned craving a burger, and Elliot said he knew a spot. We sat at a sticky table, splitting fries and trading stories. The bar was loud, filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but it felt like we were in our own bubble. You ever miss it? I asked, sipping my beer. The Marines. I mean. He leaned back, his fingers tracing the condensation on his glass. Some days. It was simple. Clear rules. Clear purpose. Out here, it's all gray. I nodded, understanding more than I expected. That's what I liked about art school. You had a canvas, a deadline, life's messier. His eyes met mine, searching. Messy's not always bad. My breath caught, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. Then someone dropped a glass across the bar, shattering the spell. Elliot cleared his throat, looking away, and I wondered if I'd imagined the weight in his words. As we left, the night air was cool, and I felt bolder than I should have. You want to come up? I asked, nodding toward my building. I've got some sketches you might like. He hesitated, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Not tonight, he said finally, but his voice was soft, almost regretful. Got an early shift. I nodded, hiding my disappointment. Rain check. Then. He smiled, small but genuine. Yeah. Rain check. As he drove off, I stood on the sidewalk, the city humming around me. I didn't know what was happening between us, but I knew I wanted more. Elliot Kane wasn't just my driver anymore was a question I needed to answer. Over the next week, Elliot became a fixture in my life. I'd text him for rides, but they were excuses to see him, to feel that electric pull every time he glanced my way. He never said no, even when I called him at odd hours, and I started to wonder if he felt it too. One night, he picked me up from a failed client meeting in the Loop. The client had hated my designs, and I was spiraling, doubting everything. I slumped into his car, my portfolio bag heavy on my lap. I'm a fraud, I muttered, staring out the window at the glittering skyline. Elliot didn't respond right away, just drove, his hands steady on the wheel. Then he pulled into an empty parking lot near the lakefront, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars. He turned to me, his face half lit by the dashboard glow. You're not a fraud, he said firmly. You're out here, fighting for what you want. That's more than most people do. I looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. You don't even know my work. I know you, he said, and the words hit me like a punch. You don't quit. You're real. My heart raced, and I leaned closer, testing the boundaries of whatever this was. And you? Are you real with me? His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd shut down. Then he sighed, running a hand through his short hair. I'm trying to be. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. I wanted to push, to ask what he meant, but something in his eyes told me to wait. Instead, we sat there, the lake lapping softly outside, and talked about art, about war, about the things we'd lost and the things we still hoped for. He drove me home. And this time, he walked me to my door. I fumbled with my keys, my pulse hammering. "You want to come in?" I asked again, my voice quieter this time. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Caleb." I held my breath, waiting for the rejection. But instead, he stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I don't want to stop seeing you." My heart stopped, then surged. "Then don't," I whispered. He didn't kiss me, didn't touch me, but the way he looked at me felt more intimate than either. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Caleb." I watched him go, my mind reeling. Elliot Kane was straighter, so he'd always believed. But something was shifting, and I was caught in the tide. The days blurred into a rhythm of rides and late-night talks. Elliot started showing up even when I didn't call, bringing coffee to my freelance gigs, waiting outside my building with a smirk and a thought you'd need a lift. I didn't question it. I was too caught up in the way he made me feel seen, alive. One evening, he drove us to a quiet spot by the Chicago River, the city's lights painting the water gold. We sat on the hood of his car, sharing a six-pack, the summer air thick with possibility. He told me about his time in the Marines, about the friends he'd lost, the guilt he carried, the way he'd locked away parts of himself to survive. I listened, my heart aching for the boy he'd been, the man he was trying to become. "I never thought I'd be here," he said, staring at the river. "Sitting with someone like you." "Someone like me?" I asked, half teasing, half afraid of his answer. He turned to me, his eyes intense. "Someone who makes me question everything." My breath hitched, and before I could think, I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, his fingers curling around mine, rough and warm. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't a confession, but it was enough to set my world spinning. The next day, everything changed. I got a call from Jared, my ex, begging to meet, claiming he'd made a mistake. Against my better judgment, I agreed, and Elliot drove me to the cafe. He didn't say much, but I could feel his tension, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. Jared was waiting outside, all charm and apologies, but his words felt hollow. I realized then that I didn't want him back, not when I had someone who saw me, really saw me. I walked away, leaving Jared stunned, and found Elliot leaning against his car, watching me. "You good?" he asked, his voice tight. "Better than good," I said, grinning. "Take me somewhere." "Anywhere." He drove us to the Adler Planetarium, the city sprawling below us like a map of our own possibilities. We stood on the steps, the stars above us, and I felt bold, reckless. I turned to him, my heart in my throat. "What are we doing, Elliot?" He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm not running from it anymore." That night, Elliot came up to my apartment. We didn't plan it. It just happened, like a wave finally breaking. We sat on my couch, the space between us shrinking with every word. I showed him my sketchish half-finished dreams of a graphic novel I'd been too scared to pursue. He studied them, his fingers tracing the lines, and said, "These are incredible. Caleb, you're incredible." I laughed, embarrassed, but his eyes were serious. And suddenly, he was closer, his hand on my knee. My heart pounded as he leaned in, his breath warm against my lips. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," I breathed. And then he kissed me. It was tentative at first, like he was testing the waters. But then it deepened, urgent and raw, like he'd been holding back for too long. My hands found his shoulders, his neck, pulling him closer. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a surrender, a beginning. We pulled apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "I've never done this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not with a guy." "I know," I said, my hand on his cheek. "We'll figure it out together." But the world wasn't as kind as that moment. The next day, Elliot got a call from his older brother, Mike, a cop with a temper and a rigid view of the world. Mike had seen us together at the planetarium, and he wasn't happy. He showed up at Elliot's place, his voice booming through the phone as Elliot put it on speaker by mistake. "You're throwing your life away for some queer kid," Mike shouted. "You're not like that, Elliot. You're better than that." I watched Elliot's face harden, his fists clenching. "You don't know me," he said quietly, then hung up. He looked at me, his eyes stormy. "I'm not ashamed of this," he said, more to himself than to me. "I'm not." But I could see the doubt creeping in, the weight of his brother's words. I took his hand, squeezing it. "You don't have to prove anything to him. Or to me." He nodded, but the tension didn't leave his shoulders. I knew then that this wasn't just about Use It, was about Elliot facing himself, his past, his fears. And I wasn't sure if he was ready. The next few weeks were a tightrope walk. Elliot and I grew closer, stealing moments between rides, kisses in his car, late-night talks in my apartment, his hand finding mine under the table at a diner. But Mike's words lingered, a shadow over every smile. Elliot was quieter, his eyes distant when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, he showed up at my door, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Mike's been talking to my old Marine buddies," he said, pacing my tiny living room. They're saying things. About me. About us." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" He stopped, his eyes meeting mine. "That I'm confused. That I'm throwing away who I am. That you're—" He trailed off, his voice breaking. "That I'm what?" I pressed, my heart pounding. He shook his head, refusing to repeat it. "It doesn't matter. They're wrong." But it did matter. I could see it in the way he flinched when his phone buzzed, in the way he avoided certain bars where his old friends hung out. I wanted to fight for him, to tell the world he was enough. But I knew this was his battle. "Let's get out of here," I said, grabbing his hand. "Just for a weekend." We drove to a cabin in Wisconsin, a friend's place by a lake, far from Chicago's noise. It was just us, the water, and the stars. We swam, laughed, made love in the moonlight. And for 2 days, it felt like we could outrun the world. Elliot was lighter, his smiles real, his kisses unguarded. But on the drive back, reality crept in. His phone lit up with texts from Mike, from friends, each one a jab at his choices. I watched him shut down, his hands tight on the wheel, and I knew we were at a crossroads. "Elliot," I said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." He didn't answer, but his hand found mine, gripping it like a lifeline. I didn't know if it was enough, but I held on, hoping. Back in Chicago, the tension grew. Elliot's brother showed up at his apartment, drunk and angry, shouting about family and honor. I wasn't there, but Elliot called me after, his voice hollow. He thinks I'm betraying him, he said. Betraying everyone. You're not betraying anyone, I said, my voice fierce. You're being honest. He was quiet for a long time. What if I'm not ready for this? For us. My heart sank, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then we take it slow. But don't shut me out. He didn't. Not entirely. But I could feel him pulling back. Wrestling with demons, I couldn't fight for him. I threw myself into my work, landing a big contract for a mural in Wicker Park. Elliot drove me to the site every day, watching me paint, his presence a quiet anchor. But the distance between us grew, and I was terrified of losing him. One night, after a long day of painting, we sat on a bench in the park, the mural half finished behind us. It was a scene of Chicago vibrant, messy, alive with two figures in the corner, hands touching, their faces blurred but unmistakable. Is that us? Elliot asked, his voice soft. Yeah, I said, my throat tight. It's what I see when I look at you. He stared at the mural, his eyes glistening. I don't know if I can be that guy. Caleb. The one you deserve. You already are, I said, taking his hand. You just have to believe it. He didn't respond, but he didn't let go either. We sat there, the city humming around us, and I prayed it was enough. The mural's unveiling was a week later. A small crowd gathered under string lights in Wicker Park. I stood nervously, my heart in my throat, as people murmured about the colors, the energy, the two figures in the corner. Elliot was there, in the back, his eyes never leaving the mural. After the speeches, he found me, his face unreadable. It's beautiful, he said, his voice low. You're incredible. I smiled, but my chest ached. You're still here. That's what matters. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and then he did something I didn't expect. He took my hand, right there in front of everyone, his grip firm and unapologetic. I'm done running, he said, his voice steady. I choose this. I choose you. The world seemed to stop, the crowd fading away. I squeezed his hand, tears stinging my eyes. You sure? He nodded, a small smile breaking through. Yeah, I'm sure. It wasn't perfect. Mike didn't come around, and some of Elliot's friends never would. But we faced it together as doubts, my fears, the world's judgment. We moved in together 6 months later, into a tiny apartment with a view of the lake. I kept painting. He kept driving. And we kept choosing each other. Every day, the mural still stands in Wicker Park, a testament to a love that fought to exist. It's not just a story of two guys who fell in love. It's a story of courage, of finding yourself in someone else's eyes, of choosing truth over fear. And every time I pass it, I see Elliot's hand in mine, and I know we're exactly where we're meant to be.